And I really began proceeding as though stories can be spirit guides for the collective, if only we took the time to be intentional and in relationship with them and with one another. Hello and welcome to the Stoner Story Witch podcast. I am Kristyn, and I feel so grateful to be living, recording, producing, editing this podcast on the lands of the Chorotega people, colonially known as Costa Rica. Today's episode is going to be one of a few in a mini-series sort of collection of episodes that honestly feels like simultaneously really exciting to be in the act of producing and putting out there, and also kind of scary. It feels personal in a way that feels maybe a little bit different, which I'll get into in a second. And also the year anniversary of the Stoner Story, which is upon us this summer solstice. And I don't know, I'm feeling like really excited about that, and like a curiosity of what am I going to be inviting in, welcoming in, consenting to for the second year. And so it just feels like there's this kind of like liminal space that I'm entering into, as like just the awareness of what podcasts am I going to be having coming up. And this is a podcast series that I've been dreaming up for the last several months. And yeah, and it feels ready. The concept of the Stoner Story Witch podcast was originally born from family movie nights with my family in the early years of the COVID pandemic. I found during that time that my relationship with cannabis was helping me to integrate a lot during this time of major collapse. And it was both collective as well as various personal collapses that were happening. And I would unwind with my kids watching just Disney movies, animated stories, just like kids shows. And I started realizing how incredibly profound and how remarkably seen I could feel from Disney movies. In some cases, I would actually revisit old stories from my childhood and see something new through my adult eyes that maybe I never really understood as a kid. And I can reflect on how throughout my life, stories have always seemed to have some nugget of wisdom that resourced me for some moment that I was in. And so the earliest visions that I actually had of this podcast were visions of me having conversations about the attachment themes in Frozen, the internal family systems and parts work in Encanto, the thresholds of life as demonstrated in the movie Turning Red, how Bluey is such a great show for the lessons that it can actually teach parents through the guise of silly world building and kind of like the empowered position that kids get to be in all the many different role reversals. And okay, so spoiler alert, I still want to do those episodes, and I hope to someday. My cloud storage is full of outlines that I will just get to at another time. But when push came to shove, Little Women and Severance were stories that felt more alive for me in the moments that I was able to press record finally on some podcast. But this episode and like this particular season, mini season, whatever it's going to be, is to remind myself that the purpose of this podcast was originally born from the practice of consuming stories together with my family. Specifically, the stories that my kids were wanting to watch with me. Building secure attachment with this shared rhythm of a family movie night, ingesting popcorn together, laughing and crying, snuggled up together on the couch. And during this time, I was learning a lot about attachment and reconnecting to my spiritual life through animism. And I really began proceeding as though stories can be spirit guides for the collective, if only we took the time to be intentional and in relationship with them and with one another. Okay, so I realized that was a pretty big statement. So I I can take a moment and kind of flesh that out a little bit. That when I say that stories can be spirit guides, I am speaking from my personal experience of, in particular, let's just take Hadestown. That Hadestown for me is an actual spiritual entity unto itself. That there are times in my daily life, I would say, that I have a thought or a feeling and I relate it to Hadestown. It can be like a melody or a lyric or something. And I feel like it is a tool. It is language. It is something that I have given my subconscious access to be able to communicate with me. And it feels resourcing. If I'm feeling a particular kind of happy, joyful moment, I can be thinking of maybe a lyric or a song that from one of the two joyful songs in that musical might spring to my head. And if I'm really feeling, overwhelmed and lonely and doubtful, then maybe one of the heavier songs might come in. And it kind of helps me to orient that okay, there is this work. And when I say Hadestown, I mean, it really is these Greek myths Hadestown is based off of, which, I mean, what were myths if not some sort of spirit guide for the collective, kind of informing people throughout history of what is an honorable life? What actions would we want to be emulating in our own life? And I think that is still on the table now. I've said before, and I'll say it again, that I think one of the things about this bread and circuses time, thank you, Carmen Spaniola, for that term to remind us that we are living through collapse of empire. There are so many circuses. There's so many great stories out there. And so many of the themes are a regurgitation and sometimes maybe even an appropriation of liberatory themes. But when I say let's take the time to be intentional with the stories and with each other, let's locate who we are in the story, what is going on in the world right now that we are engaging in this story, and how is this story resourcing us, challenging us, companioning us to live out what liberation would look like. And so yeah, where's the guidance there, and where's the inspiration? I hope that makes sense. This will be a theme that I'll keep coming back to. And also one thing to notice too is, or that I want to notice is where am I hearing about these stories? There's so many great movies. There's so many great books. Everybody always wants to recommend the latest thing that they're watching or the latest thing that they're reading. And so there is, there's only so many hours in the day. There's only so many hours of brain glucose that we have to be able to really, for me, to be able to really integrate a story. And so who am I doing it for? How did that story find its way to me? And for me, I think it's really powerful to, just like I would be holding space for my best friend who is enjoying Severance, and I want to, connect with them in that way and dive deep into the themes in Severance. I have these little people. I have these kids that I brought into the world and I'm trying to raise, and they are also being courted by stories. They are also being held, guided, companioned in whatever way, much like I was when I was a kid, that I didn't have the vocabulary for it then, but I can look back and reflect on it now. And so absolutely, I want to make sure that in ongoing seasons and ongoing years of the podcast, I am highlighting some of the stories that my kids introduced to me, that they brought into my life, that were speaking to them. And so that is to say, the story for this season is a story that my kids introduced to me. It feels a little like that homecoming as I'm gearing up to celebrate this anniversary, like a return to my roots, if you will. We need to touch on real quickly an essay that Sophie Strand recently wrote in her Substack titled The Sexy Inventory. And I'm mentioning it here specifically because, like so many of Sophie's posts, she does such an amazing job of articulating with words the exact feelings that I am most struggling to convey. Those of you who have been listening to the podcast know that I am a huge fan of Sophie Strand and her work. I will link to her Substack in the show notes. And at the beginning of the year, we had originally planned that I would have Sophie on the pod, and I have just been holding vigil for her. She is going through some really intense and scary diagnoses as she's living with several chronic illnesses, and so I'm holding that very tenderly. I continue to, in my own way, have her on my podcast. in she is nourishing me in really deep ways through her Substack, and I am going to yeah, as a part of yeah, wanting to companion Sophie through this hard time, want to be in relationship with her. Sophie Strand, again, I will link to this in her sexy inventory, writes the following. I have a strongly held belief that people who don't know what they want are profoundly dangerous. They are open to being possessed by desires not their own, the desires of capitalism and harm, the desires of corporate greed. We live in a culture where we are force-fed other people's desires and told they are our own. The only way to defend against this hijacking of our agency is, I believe, to get really clear about what we actually want, what we actually desire, what we think is sexy. What are you into? This is a powerful question. Of course, there is no pre-cultural self, and it's important that we acknowledge, and it's important we understand how our desires grow from ground that has already been seeded with anthropocentrism and sexism and glyphosate. Okay, and Sophie continues to write a little bit about how Octavia Butler is one of her secular saints, representing for her the ways in which imagination paired with rigorous ethical orientation can be liberatory and sexy and a good read. Sophie writes how she has been nurtured by the content of various notebooks of Octavia Butler, and in particular, a list of what is sexy. Sophie continues, a deeply personal inventory of what someone enjoys and is drawn to in the world and in storytelling. It is someone trying to figure out what drives their stories. The injunction against cliches and tropes always seems to me to be an injunction against the effective chemical pathways that make a good story. We tailor medicine to our chemical pathways, knowing the ways to use our metabolic makeup to access healing. Tropes and cliches are also metabolic shortcuts to our deepest desires and needs. Milman Parry revolutionized classical studies when he showed that Homer was not a singular author, but a tradition of oral storytellers relying on standardized phrases for mnemonic recall and recycling cliches and tropes with which their audiences deeply resonated. And these are the stories that last, the stories that know what we really want, which is usually not very cool or in vogue. Sophie continues, best-selling romance and romantasy writer Jennifer Armentrout advises new writers to pay attention to the tropes that they read for, saying that if you know what you like to read, you know what you will like to write. And in my experience, this is deeply true. What do you like to read? What for you is sexy? What tropes and cliches do you find yourself drawn to? And that is the end of Sophie's. I took chunks of it. There is more. I will link to the whole thing. You will not regret it when you subscribe to her Substack or buy any of her books. Pretty much every single one of Sophie's essays, I have been greatly nourished by the words that can add enough coherence to what I'm trying to do with my podcast, which is to connect the dots between how we can embody the stories we love. She writes that if you know what you like to read, you know what you like to write. But I will add that it also informs me how I want to live. And so, because I am on Substack, I responded to this particular essay. And this is what I wrote for what I think is sexy in the comment section. Secret journals or riddled scavenger hunts left behind by some wise elder for some too young to understand yet protege in the event of their early death, which of course happens because that elder was an enemy of the state. And now that protege is feeling a continuing companioning and guidance from that elder as they creep ever closer to uncovering the big lie. Trademark. It's so fucking sexy. Can't get enough of that trope these days. And the feeling seems mutual because I swear it is in most of the stories I'm encountering lately. I'm going to transition a little bit. I've talked before about Frozen 2 just on various podcast episodes. Frozen 2 is actually a great example of this trope that I just want to like dive into just a little more deeply. That lullaby that the mom sings at the very beginning becomes this roadmap for the unfolding quest of the entire movie. I've covered Severance quite a bit on this podcast and how Irv leaves behind a literal map behind the poster and secretly tells Dylan about it through this coded language. And the Empyrean series shows how this deceased father has saved books and journals for his daughter to read and glean its wisdom, should he perchance die. Enola Holmes, in the story of Enola Holmes, her mother leaves a riddled scavenger hunt of sorts for her. And these are just off the top of my head. But the stories that are finding me now, many of them have this idea of some wise elder has foresight to pass on a baton of knowledge, seeking connection from beyond in the event that life doesn't go as we might have hoped it would. And so, since I have an animist relationship to stories, I have to wonder what might the message be. For me, it feels like the tropes that I find the most compelling and the stories that nourish me the most are the ones that deep down I wish to emulate. So, what is the baton of knowledge I wish to pass on? Who am I yearning to connect with? And so I know that this podcast is for my kids. Not just this episode, although this episode specifically is the one that I'm explicitly coming out and saying that this is for my kids. But the podcast in general, I'm realizing is my practice of leaving behind my journals, my little scavenger hunts. Another element of the revelatory integration that I was having through my family movie nights was a desire to share that part of me with my kids, all this newness that I was uncovering, or perhaps this old wise part of me that is being excavated under all that I have to unlearn. I really want to show my kids and have them see how patriarchy makes us so quick to trust Prince Hans in Frozen, how our white settler bodies are primed for the white ladies are secretly indigenous and never have to sacrifice anything in order to do the right thing narrative that we see in Frozen 2, and the anti-capitalist messaging embedded in both Mary Poppins and Mary Poppins Returns. However, my kids are too young to understand that now. And truthfully, they may never actually care about the things that feel meaningful to me, at least in the way that I do. And yet, my dad died before I was old enough to feel like I can, as an adult, say that I really knew who he was. Because as an adult, there simply aren't enough conversations with my mother, his friends, or my aunt, his sister, that will change the fact that I still don't feel like I know who he was. And it breaks my heart in a million pieces to think that I might die before my kids can really know who I am. My thinking mind could say that the child part of me feels insecure and abandoned, that my dad didn't have any message beyond the grave for me. The same thinking mind could say that the mother part of me wants to be seen for the parts of me that I am most proud of, and that my kids will remember how I loved them with intention, and that if, heaven forbid, I die before they can ask me the hard questions, I will have left a trail of breadcrumbs in the form of podcast episodes. That whatever wisdom I'm gleaning in this life is in their service is in honor of the world that I'm reaching towards, the one that they might want to pick up the baton for should they feel called in the same way that I feel called in this life. Because my dad died when I was young, I don't shy away from speaking about death with my kids. I actually believe that death phobia is a symptom of the disease of colonization and capitalism. You can put a pin in that conversation. So, when my kids have expressed preemptive grief at the thought of me dying or have asked what happens when we die, I tell them what I know to be true, that the world is more mysterious and magical than our brains and bodies can comprehend, that our spirits live on and can visit us in our dreams. Because I had a numinous experience upon my dad's death in the hospital, and my dad visited me in my dreams several times after he died. Again, we'll put a pin in those stories for another day. My kids asked me if I could come to them in their dreams after I die. And I said that I would do everything in my power to visit them. And also that it will probably make it easier for me to visit them because they already know how to do a dream place. At which point, one of my kids asked me, "Can you make a dream place and put it on the podcast so we can find it if you die?" So, all of that to say, today's episode is from me and for my kids. And because it's a trope that I'm being followed by, maybe it's from all parents who have crossed the veil of death before they ever thought possible, and for all the kids that they left behind. I know from experience how easy it is to be left behind by a parent who is not prepared to die unexpectedly. But my trauma has taught me to always be prepared that I might die, to get current in my relationships in case this might be the last time we are together earthside. So, how has that impacted my parenting? While the truth is that to some extent, all of my episodes are for my kids, as this result of losing my dad when I was on the threshold of puberty, is that I'm almost convinced that I won't survive to watch my kids grow up. So I'm trying to offer enough of who I am in these podcasts that they can know me and hopefully feel me if I don't survive to their adulthood. And so a few weeks ago, I did mention this to one of my kids, the idea that even though I do all that I can to be safe and healthy, I'm doing my podcast so that I can be with you to guide and companion you in your life, whoever you become, even if my spirit is no longer in my body. And then my kid smiled at me and said, "Well, then can you record a dream place?" So I suppose at this point, I need to explain what we are talking about by dream place. So, Dream Place is a guided meditation that I started doing for my kids over a year ago. But almost exactly a year ago, it was almost a requirement every night at bedtime, as one of my kids was dealing with some pretty bad nighttime anxiety. I actually hadn't done one for them in quite some time. But as I said, I've told them the truth that, like, from how I have experienced my life, what happens when you die, we can visit our loved ones through dreams because my dad visited me in my dreams. I told my kids that when I die, I will try to visit them in their dream place, and that is one of the reasons that we can practice, one of the reasons why we practice. I don't know. I've tried to Google it and I feel like I can't find like one coherent answer. I've heard in different contexts a quote that goes something like, witchcraft or magic is the ability to shift one's consciousness at will. All right. So dreams and stories are in this world of imagination. And if we can imagine better worlds, and if we can spend time envisioning and embodying liberation, then we could actually put our dreams into practice. In the words of Orpheus from Hadestown, may the world we dream about be the one we live in now. And so Today's episode is going to be about dreams because it's both like a very, in a podcast that has witch in the title, it feels relevant and meaningful because dreams are such a powerful tool that we see in stories and also maybe in our real lives, right? Because if stories can reflect reality, I want to actually share a personal practice that I have shared with my kids in my home for over a year now. The gist of these next couple of episodes is going to be I will be talking about a story. The story is Dream Productions, which is a little kind of mockumentary animated series. It's a series of episodes that takes place between the movies Inside Out and Inside Out 2. So this episode is episode 1, and it is just basically sharing my personal connection, my why I am doing this. And then my next episode will discuss the connection to the story itself of Dream Productions. And then I will have an episode where I introduce the practice of a guided meditation or a trance journey that I have called in my home, going to our dream place. And then I will actually record a dream place guided meditation, trance journey for anybody who might be interested in attempting to practice. Totally understanding that I am not a clinical hypnotherapist, but if you want to learn more, I advise you to check out Carmen Spaniola at the Numinous Network, who has several offerings of different hypnosis, meditations, trance journeys for various intentions. So this is just me sharing my own little breadcrumbs for my own little kids that one day may want to have this, or anybody who may find some sort of comfort in it. Okay, so I guess to provide a little bit more context about the dream place itself, and I don't remember the exact order of events, but I remember it was over a year ago now. One of my kids was experiencing increasing nighttime anxiety, making bedtimes quite stressful. And one of the fears that they cited was that they were worried about nightmares. So I suggested that they could create their own dream place with their own setting, characters, and a competent protector who would be a constant guide and companion, and that I would be willing to help them construct this dream place. And I wanted to say that competent protector as a phrase is one that I have definitely taken from the work of Carmen Spaniola and all of her various guided meditations that she has done. Beginning then, whenever that was, the Dream Place meditation was born. And I had lots of tools and experience with nervous system regulation, attachment, and trance work through my work with Carmen on the Numinous Network. And so every night that I would do this meditation, I would just make up something kind of new. And it would basically follow the same progression. It pretty much always entailed a full body relaxation, prompts to relax and unwind the mind. And then they would imagine themselves in a beautiful place in nature with very vague descriptions and gentle inquiries so that they could build it themselves, where they would meet up with that competent protector, that person or animal that loves them no matter what and will guide them and protect them the entire time. So then I prompt them, if they wish and are still awake, to travel to the dream place with their competent protector. When I share, I haven't finished writing the dream place that I will be sharing here on the podcast, but I will probably add for us a prompt to be setting some sort of intention as well, whether it's like an intention just to relax or an intention to create the space for a parlay with a beloved who has passed on or whatever. So, but back to the story. I mean, this was a pretty constant practice that I did for my kids for several weeks, such that my partner and I would even joke that I should record it should there come a time where I wouldn't be home for bedtime, that he or babysitter could play it for them. So that is what we're doing here, folks. the intention with these next few podcasts is to gain skillfulness in a spiritual practice referred to as trance or guided meditation. I've heard before that spiritual encounters are always an accident, yet we can practice to become accident prone. And so it's my hope that if this practice is one that speaks to you, you can become accident prone for whatever intention you may have in the service of collective liberation, right? To live a life more liberated, to get better sleep, to commune with spirit guides, to connect with a loved one who has passed, things like that. All right, well, I'm just tuning into my body, and this feels like enough. I think this will be the first episode, and my next episode, I will actually be diving into the story of Dream Productions and why I think it is a really great story for talking not just about like kind of this competent protector world, but also what does it mean to be living in like a values aligned community? Because I will talk more about that on the next podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I'm really, really grateful for anyone who has tuned in over this last almost year. And as always, reach out to me at stonerstorywitch@gmail.com with any comments, connections, anything at all, anything that's resonated with you. I always love to hear from folks. I am also now on Substack, not just to consume wonderful content from so many great writers, but I am also publishing the blurbs for my podcast as kind of practice with a little blog type format. If there's ever content that kind of feels like relevant or juicy, but I don't necessarily want to make it into a podcast, maybe I'll start posting things there. So feel free to subscribe if you want to be getting like just an email update, and I will include links to the podcast as well. But yeah, it's been fun to kind of be pollinating a little bit, be kind of like commenting on Sophie's Substack and other folks when they're like trying to have a conversation about a certain thing. Certainly, I'm trying to have a conversation at this little campfire on the internet, but I really love pulling up a blanket at other people's campfires too. So join me on Substack if you haven't already done that. Follow Sophie Strand, Carmen Spaniola. I will, of course, link to them in the show notes. And thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that you can land some joy and ease and delight amidst all the absurdity that is going on here at, the collapse of empire, at the end of late stage capitalism and the rise of fascism in the world. It's a scary place, and ever the more important that we be enchanted and resourced to be our most bold, brave, and embodied selves. And so it is. Take good care.